let's say Bitcoin up to 1 million. I'm very confident that all the prediction of the theory will apply at least until Bitcoin is $1 million. Now, between 1 million to 10 million, it's a little bit more challenging, mostly because we are going against some of the limits of the financial system of the world can handle. So we will have to be a little bit more careful. But even there, 10 million is not out of the question for the theory. The theory says it should go up to at least another order of magnitude. This is the time. Bitcoin is growing with this incredibly fast parabola. Well, Bitcoin is time to the 6. So it's a super parabola. It goes really, really fast. Knowing ahead of time, 10 years, that a particular financial asset will do this, it's almost like magic, right? And it's not Giovanni's magic, it's Bitcoin's magic.
So today I've sat down with a very, very special guest. He has a PhD in astrophysics. Giovanni, welcome to the podcast.
It's my pleasure. I'm very excited too.
I'm very excited as well because we're going to be talking about everything to do with your model, the Bitcoin power law model. I think the best place to maybe start today's conversation might actually be explaining the differences between the power law model and another very popular model that has been, in the news a lot over the past 5 years, and that is the stock to flow model. So maybe we can start there with the differences between those two models, because most people would be a lot more familiar with the stock to flow model.
Yeah. So first of all, let me make a small correction or a big correction. That is, at this point, because model, in science means you're studying a phenomena, and you see some regularities in the phenomena, and you are trying to find some kind of law, some kind of mathematics, maybe a simple formula, maybe a procedure, an algorithm to analyze what you are studying. But at this point, in particular, this happened in the last several months. I developed an entire theory. So when people say this is a model, I'm usually correcting them. It's a theory. And I will explain you later why such a difference, because basically my claim is that I think I understand Bitcoin. I know it sounds a big claim, but I think I understand Bitcoin completely, because this is what theory want to do. So theory are an understanding of phenomena where you try to go to the cause. You're saying these happen because of these causes, right? There's a reason, and this leads to this other thing. And so in terms of Bitcoin, I think I figured out basically all the aspects of Bitcoin. I know it sounds a big deal, but it is, in the sense that I can tell you why we have all the parameters, all the fundamental parameters of Bitcoin, the addresses, how adoption is growing. I can tell you exactly how adoption is growing and how it will grow in the future. I can tell you how the price is affected by adoption, so more Bitcoiners. I can tell you how the energy involved in the system, because it's a big deal, right? So as a physicist, I'm trying to see Bitcoin as a system, what we call a system. A system is when you put a box around something that you want to study, and you're trying to study all the different aspects of this system, of this little box that it's like a part of a universe that you're focusing on. And so I can explain adoption, I can explain the price, I can explain hash rate, so the energy that is involved in Bitcoin, and I can explain how all these things interact with each other and make Bitcoin do all the things that it does, including the bubbles. So I can even have part of the theory is including the bubble and the cycle, and explain how the cycle play a role in all these. So it's a full theory. And now, of course, like any theory can be improved. Before we started to record this, we were talking about how any scientific theory needs to be falsifiable. That means all the things I'm saying, and there is a reason why I make this big claim, because I'm trying, it's almost a way of being honest, right? You're saying, this is the theory, this is what the theory says, this how the theory tries to explain everything about Bitcoin, and these are the claims that come, like making prediction. This is what theory do all the time. You need to make a prediction. You say, under these circumstances, this is what will happen. Under these circumstances, this is what will happen. And if there is a problem with your prediction, then it's one of the way of challenging the theory. It's actually a way of being honest, because if I had a theory and the theory didn't make any prediction or didn't make any prediction that can be tested, then it will not be falsifiable. Then I was giving you the example before of me saying, okay, there is a teacup that is orbiting the solar system, and this is my theory, right? I have this beautiful theory of the teacup, or it's not a scientific theory because nobody can, prove that is right or wrong, right? There is no telescope powerful enough. We don't have a probe. Where is this teacup, right? How can we find it? Well, it's over there. Well, it's so small that it's almost impossible to find it. So it will not be a scientific theory. Instead, with our Bitcoin theory, we can make prediction and then see if this prediction will come true or no. And that is one way of testing the theory. Is the theory correct, right? So right now, it's from what I can understand, it can explain everything that happened to Bitcoin history. Now, everything on a certain point, we need to explain better what that means. For example, the theory doesn't tell you what Bitcoin does day by day. I wish it did, but I cannot tell you with that level of precision. I can tell you the general trend. I can tell you the bubbles, how big the bubbles are. It can tell us a lot of things, a lot of important things, actionable things, because actually an investor can use them because it's not random. That is the entire idea. Science also has applications, right? There is the technology aspects of science, and we have that technology. We have all this way of telling when Bitcoin reaches a bottom, when it reaches a top. And so these are actionable things for an investor because you could do DCA with it and so on. So it's a powerful theory. It's much beyond. So that is one of the first differences. Right? You asked me the difference with S2F. That is one of the huge, big differences. It's a complete theory that gives us a particular picture of how Bitcoin works and why it does the things it does, but we can go through it at a certain point. And it makes very strong prediction and also tell us why these predictions are going to be true, because given the nature of Bitcoin, one of the punchline that we will discuss is that Bitcoin is a scale invariant system, and I will explain you what that means. But this is like the essence of Bitcoin. If Bitcoin is really scale invariant, then scale invariant system tend to continue to be scale invariant, because invariant means exactly that. They don't change. So if something doesn't change because of its nature, then it will continue to behave in that way. In particular, we can also specify under which condition that is for another order of magnitude, because Bitcoin grew up from being almost nothing, very, very small system, to this huge, big entity, and it did it over many, many orders of magnitude. And again, as we go through my explanation and my slides, I will show you what I mean with that. And so it will be almost like going against its own nature for Bitcoin to do something different for the next order of magnitude. And for next order of magnitude, I mean another factor of 10. So let's say Bitcoin up to 1 million. I'm very confident that everything I'm telling you, all the prediction of a theory, will apply at least until Bitcoin is $1 million. Now, between 1 million to 10 million, it's a little bit more challenging, mostly because we are going against some of the limits of what the financial system of the world can handle. So we will have to be a little bit more careful. But even there, 10 million is not out of the question for the theory. The theory says it should go up to at least another order of magnitude. This is the time. People sometimes make me fun of me because they take a little snippet and they say, "Oh, I tell them the exact date." Now, the theory can't tell you the exact date because you can plug it in the formula. Now, what the real Bitcoin will do, it can be a few months later, it can be a few months before, but within that level of precision, knowing ahead of time, 10 years, that a particular financial asset will do this, it's almost like magic, right? And it's not Giovanni's magic, it's Bitcoin's magic. That is one of the things also I'm trying to communicate. Everything I'm saying has nothing to do with me being this genius person. It is always, for me, it's like I'm singing the praises of Bitcoin, how this amazing, beautiful system that is very regular, very precise, very intelligent, because these are all the things that we derive from the theory, all the implications of the theory. It's almost like a philosophy at a certain point, but backed by science, because I will never care about a philosophy of Bitcoin if it was not backed by science. And so these are all the things that I'm telling you, that the prediction is strong because of these two properties of Bitcoin that are, it's a scale invariant system and is also a periodic system. These are the two. If you're telling a scientist, if you're asking a scientist, when are you confident that you can make predictions? Because this is what science all does all the time. Like imagine I want to send a probe to Mars, right? And I want to make it land in a particular spot near this crater that I want to study. This is what we can do at this point with the science that we have. Well, it's a prediction, right? Because I need to make a path, I need to use my computers and say, okay, I would need to boost the rocket at this particular, with this particular energy to arrive at this spot, etc. That is a prediction. You make prediction in science. Like, if we want to know when an eclipse is, that is a prediction, right? Science makes predictions. This is what we do all the time. People don't realize that. Maybe they never thought about science like that. Science is all about making prediction. If I'm telling you, okay, you have this medical problem and I can give you this medicine, that is a prediction, that you will respond to in a certain way, right? Because I know that what happens when I give you this medicine. It's all about prediction. And so, and there are, you can calculate how confident you are based on previous situation. The problem with Bitcoin, we have only Bitcoin, one Bitcoin, right? Actually, it's not a problem. It's a good thing. We have one Bitcoin, but it's the first time in history, right? We have this incredible experiment of this financial system that behaves in this way, it has these characteristics. Yes, there are the other altcoins, but it's different because Bitcoin behaves in a different way because there are so many people involved in Bitcoin. This is why, it's so big in terms of the price and the market cap. Versus any other altcoin. And no altcoin behaves like Bitcoin. That is one of the first things that we know from the science. And so, but we can still make prediction because we have history, right? And many times people say, oh, your predictions are based on history. Well, what else could I use? You use the history to infer something about the future. And one of the time when you feel confident to do that, if your system is periodic, because this, like the orbit of the planets, once, a planet does that for one orbit or two orbit, with that Pluto, we didn't even have one single orbit, but we could check, the other planets, how they behave, we could check a little bit of the orbit and then say, okay, it's going to behave in this way, even if we never observe as human beings one entire orbit of Pluto, because it takes many, many years to do that. So that is one time when something's periodic, and the other time is when it's scale invariant. And it's a little bit more complicated concept, but not so difficult. But I will explain it as we talk. So
just there,
interrupt me.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm just sure.
No, go ahead, because I talk too much sometimes, and then go ahead and don't let the host ask any questions. So ask me, but I didn't finish yet about S2F. But if you want to interrupt me, you can. But I want to say something about S2F.
Okay,
it's very important.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. Just quickly, I'm sure the listener might have a question. So anyone who might not have stumbled upon the power law model, just earlier we were talking about the
theory. Let's call it theory. Let's call it what it is.
Power law theory, more encapsulating than a model. So you were talking about, you were more sure that it's going to be following the theory up until it gets to $1 million a coin. But after then, and between $1 and $10 million a coin, things could become a little bit more unpredictable. So I think
correct.
Someone who might not have stumbled upon this theory before might be wondering, okay, what is this theory predicting? When is Bitcoin supposed to hit $1 million? And is that around 2032 or 2033?
Yeah, about 10 years from now. In fact, and we will discuss all this, but just to give you, in fact, actually even better, we could do this where we can say, what about 15 years, right? And 15 years simply because it's the history of Bitcoin that we have so far. So it's kind of easy to think, what if we double the history of Bitcoin, right? If we double the history of Bitcoin and it's 15 years, so because 15 years, okay, it's close enough to 10 years when Bitcoin would be $1 million. And so we can actually calculate what Bitcoin is supposed to be in 15 years using this theory. The theory says, one of the punchline of the theory is that Bitcoin is a very precise, simple function of time. And we will explain why. And the function is roughly, because it's a little bit more precise, but to simplify, it's time measured in terms of days from when Bitcoin was created. Bitcoin was created in January 3, 2009, right? That was the fatal day of Bitcoin, when he was a little baby and he was born. So if you measure, and everything we do, it's all in terms of how many days. You can do it in years, but days is a good, you can do it in seconds, but it's much, day is a good compromise, right? It's this day, this other day. And so you give me the days from when Bitcoin was created, I can tell you what we call the trend price. And from the charts that I will show you, we will understand better what this trend price is. But, it's kind of like a fair value for Bitcoin. Bitcoin can be a little bit below, it can be above, and it doesn't do it in a random way. It do it in a very precise way. So we know how much it should be above or below according to the cycle, where we are in the cycle. But in general, it gives us kind of a feeling of where Bitcoin should be, okay? And so that can be calculated pretty easily. I mean, even made, maybe you can put it in one of the link in your, when you post the video. I have like a little app that you can actually set up. I put all the equations already, and I can give you the link so people can play with it, because it's really cool. It's a little app called Desmos, that is like basically an online calculator, graphing calculator. So you can actually plot the behavior of Bitcoin and play with it and say, okay, what will happen? When was Bitcoin $1? Okay, and so you can go in the app and see, oh, it took this a number of days, about 800 days. Well, it turned out that really Bitcoin, so the app says 800 using the formula, and 880, something like that. And then it turned out that Bitcoin was $1 920 days after Bitcoin was born. So it's very close, right? Within a few weeks, like formula tells you, you can try $10, you can try $100 and see, okay, what was the difference between the theoretical calculation and actually the real value? And you can do the other way around, where you can say, okay, what about the future? What if I plug in today? Like, for example, right now, let's say, I think we are around 5,550 days, right? And you can check online. You can ask ChatGPT, if you use ChatGPT, how many days from January 3, 2009, or even Google. You can say, oh, what is today? And people can play with the app. I actually invite them, because in science, we are like Bitcoin. We say, don't trust, verify. That is what we like in science. We don't want to you trust me. I want you to play with the formula and try to understand them. But so basically, the formula is, there is a constant that is not so important, but when you do the calculation, you have to include it. It's a very small number, and then time to the 6. So it's basically a super parabola. This is one of the things that I don't understand about people don't like it, the theory, because we are saying Bitcoin is growing with this incredibly fast parabola. Parabola means power to the square, right? So you have the time to the square. If it was a parabola, it will be time to the square. This is what a parabola is. Well, Bitcoin is time to the 6. So it's a super parabola. It goes really, really fast. It's almost indistinguishable from an exponential by naked eye. But there are big consequences from being a super parabola, what we call a power law, that will be, this is why it's called the power law of the theory of Bitcoin, because anything that goes with a variable to the power of something, right? That something can be a number, and it can be a small number, it can be a big number, it can be a positive number, a negative number. But if you have a quantity y equal x to the power, right, of something, like a parabola, for example, it's a power law because the number is 2, right? We studied that in high school. Anything that has this kind of relationship, one quantity is the power of another quantity, is called a power law. And Bitcoin is a power law in time, where x is the time and y is the price. And that number, that exponent, that power, is called exponent or power. It's the same thing, two different words for the same thing. It's close to 6. And there is a reason. The theory explains why that number is 6. That is the beautiful thing about the theory. The theory has an explanation for all these things. And so if we want to know in the future what the price is, for example, we can say, what if we double the time that Bitcoin has existed? So it's existed for 15 years. What if we double that time to other 15 years? So how it goes, you take that doubling, so 2, and then you take the power of 6. 2 to the 6 is 64. So basically means if you wait for another 15 years, you will get, just holding, you will get a reward that is 64 times whatever price Bitcoin is right now, roughly. So if right now it's about $60,000, you multiply that by 64, you get 3 million and something, 3.5 million, something close to that. So that is a very strong prediction of a theory that it says we should see a 64 times valuation of Bitcoin in a similar time to what we have already now in terms of history of Bitcoin. It's a very, very precise prediction in that sense. Now, is it going to be $1,000 more? Is it going to be $1,000 less? Of course, right? It's not that precise, but it's still incredible that we can tell how much we are going to expect given a certain time. And we can calculate, for example, when it will reach a million. A million is about 10 years from now. 3 million, 3.5 million in 15 years. And you can plug in the formula that I told you. It's a very simple, it's amazing to think that Bitcoin actually can be explained with a simple formula. That is the beauty of this discovery. Now, let me tell you, and we can, as we go through the slides, I will explain you the logic and how we arrived to that. But because you asked this question and I want to address it, and we can have an entire interview only on that, but I want to answer it very quickly. And I'm sorry if I am so strong on this, but people can look at my material in my account, also my YouTube. I have a YouTube account that hopefully can link to people to discover more about all these. I made an entire video about S2F. And I will never put down another data analyst or their work if there was no serious problems behind it. If somebody contributes, I'm the first one to say, wow, this is amazing. Maybe we can include it in the theory. We can improve a theory with it. Because it's all about discovering Bitcoin, understanding Bitcoin. It's not my theory versus another one. Science doesn't work like that. We are happy when somebody makes progress in the field because we want to understand. It's not about ego. It's about understanding. I want to understand Bitcoin from a scientific point of view. If somebody comes in and makes a serious, valid contribution, I am the first one. If somebody comes in, imagine I am, and now because I believe it, I am like Galileo, but in a sense, a little bit I am, because I'm doing what Galileo did, was introducing science in something where people were using astrology before, right? So I'm kind of doing a little bit like that. And people say, well, is the Earth at the center of the universe? Well, it's important for Galileo to say, no, it's not, right? It's not like a kind of social justice kind of thing where, well, everybody has a right to exist, right? Or the universe is where the sun is at the center of the solar system, or is the Earth, or maybe neither, because actually it turns out that it's really neither. But, it's almost kind of like if the sun is at the center of the solar system. It's a very different point of view than saying is the Earth, because there are all kinds of consequences if the Earth is at the center versus the sun. And so when Galileo wanted to push his heliocentric theory, he didn't come up with it, but he was one of the people that brought all this evidence, like with this telescope and so on. He will put down, he will attack the geocentric theory. It's part of doing science. You need to explain why something is also wrong, because that is one of the things that many people in my X tell me, oh, focus on your theory, don't attack other theories. If there is a theory that is so wrong that make people think in the wrong way about Bitcoin, it's actually my duty to say so. And that is the case with S2F. S2F is actually not wrong because it's the wrong model. It's wrong because it's an illusion. It is literally an illusion. In fact, recently I made a post where I use completely fake data, like a fake issuance data, like the production of Bitcoin, how many Bitcoins are produced. I just make not random numbers, just random. With a computer can create random numbers. And then I follow plan B steps. I reproduce I have a graph where I put one over the other, and my random numbers reproduce perfectly S to F. What that tells you, that is fake. And there is a very simple reason why it's fake, because basically the change in issuance is a function of time. It's a very simple function of time. Every 4 years it jumps, right? It jumps because S to F, and the issuance actually goes down, and that makes the S to F, because S to F is, you take the supply and you divide it by the issuance, it makes S to F jump too. But it's the simplest possible change in time, right? Jumping one time, one block, one single block every 4 years. So it gives like a directionality in time, and that creates the illusion that there is a relationship between S to F and the price. There is no such a thing. Absolutely not. They are not related at all. In fact, if I make a fake S to F, completely based on random numbers, I get exactly the same result. I can actually superimpose plan B S to F using real data with my fake S to F. They're identical. They cannot be distinguished. And that shows you that S to F is made up. It doesn't exist. It's an illusion. And it's so mind-blowing to me, because millions of people follow him and they believe in S to F, and it became so popular because, Forbes talked about it was on Fidelity prospectus, to talk about Bitcoin. Like serious people were discussing this model, and it's a magic trick. It's like one of the simple, like if a student took a class with me and did that, I will fail them. They will fail the class, because it's really horrible. It's like it's a trick.
Okay, so I think that was a fascinating overview of the differences between the Bitcoin power law theory and the stock to flow model. Now we're about to get into a number of fascinating charts that Giovanni has prepared for us today, which I am very, very excited to get into.
Yeah.
But before we get into those, I got a question from a listener, and it actually kind of relates to something you mentioned before. So you said only Bitcoin follows a power law. None of the other altcoins do. And I've always found that very interesting, very fascinating. Now, a question that one of my listeners had, Jack, he said Bitcoin in US dollar prices follows a Bitcoin power law, but does it follow power laws in other fiat currencies like the Argentinian peso or the Egyptian pound and the Lebanese pound? He was interested in why it's only the US dollar that we see this power law.
Well, it's not just US dollar. It will work with any stable currency, right? And this is a question that is asked all the time, and it's a relatively valid question, but also sometimes it's almost like a provocation. But let me answer it like in the most scientific possible way. I always make this example. I say, in one of the, Galileo did a lot of progress in understanding reality when he tried to focus on what is essential versus what is not essential. Before Galileo, if you had any two people, if you took a person, even the wisest person, Aristoteles, Socrates, Plato, some of the wisest people that ever lived, and you ask them, if I have two stones, one large stone and a small stone, which one will arrive to the ground first? They will say the big stone. And it's not true. And that is because they kind of got confused, like a little bit like this. We were distracting themselves and thinking that the particular is actually the general. So what do I mean with that? Well, we know, for example, that a leaf falls very slowly when I drop it in comparison with a stone. So we took that example and kind of extrapolated, and they imagined that anything that is lighter is going to fall slower. So even a small stone. It turns out that it's the other way around. The leaf is the particular case, and because it's so light and also the shape of a leaf, it makes it float. The air resistance became much more important, or as important, as gravity. So there are two things. There is the air drag and there is gravity. If you find a situation where gravity is dominant, like in the case of two stones, and they don't have to be even big stones, it could be relatively medium-sized stone, like big stone and a medium-sized stones, and you drop them, they arrive to the ground basically at the same time, maybe with a small little difference, but you will need a very sophisticated measurement system to notice the difference, okay? So that I use that as an example because I say it's basically like me telling you the gravity is the dominant effect here. And yes, inflation, it's a small correction, and for Bitcoin is a small correction. That is the entire point because it's an anti-inflationary asset. So if you look at the history of Bitcoin and you correct it for inflation, dollar inflation, it's almost like nothing. It's a small correction. It's almost like this air drag correction that you can always do. But in science, first, we want to focus on what is simple and what is essential. And then we can always add all the complications. So I can add very easily a relatively big but constant rate of inflation. And I did it in my X. I post these things. I have my Medium articles where I'm trying to organize all this information so people can find it instead of asking me all the time. I'm trying to put it all together. But it's one of the things that, in fact, I have a Q&A. I will give you the link for the article so people can read it. But it's the place where almost all a big chunk of all the things I'm working on is there. And I have a Q&A, and I almost make a joke. I have this, actually make a joke because I try to make a meme. I have a flying cow. I call it, they call this fallacy, because it is a fallacy for people that are not used to thinking this way. And they call it the fallacies of a flying cow. So the Argentinian pesos is a situation where it's not anymore a small correction, because a small correction, the power law will always be a power law, even with if you give me 5% inflation rate, 6% inflation rate. Now the curve in power law will be slightly, the slope will be smaller. Instead of being 5.8, let's say it's 5.6, but it will be still a power law. But now if you're dealing with something crazy like the pesos, the Argentinian peso, it's almost like you're saying, I have this meme where you see a flying cow during a tornado. It's actually a real picture that somebody took during a crazy, one of these tornado chasers, during a tornado, during a hurricane. And you see the cow flying. So, and I made the joke, I say, hey, this Newton plan N, because I am plan G, there is plan B, plan N, Newton, I checkmate, checkmate physicist, your crazy, stupid theory of gravity doesn't work, look, a flying cow, you don't understand that in a situation like that, the hurricane winds are dominant. They became so strong that in fact the cow can fly. It's stronger than gravity. So if you go in a tornado and you're studying flying cows, you're studying flying cows, you're not studying gravity. Gravity becomes a correction, it's the other way around. So if somebody asks me, can you use the Argentinian peso? Sure, I can do it, but then I'm going to study the peso. I'm going to study what the peso is doing, because the peso the inflation of the peso became so dominant that overcomes whatever regularity Bitcoin has. And by the way, I did it, and for almost for 10 years, actually, even with the peso, that is incredible, you have a power law. And then just recently, in the last few years, the inflation went so crazy that you see actually a small deviation. I was actually surprised how small the deviation is. But of course, it will not follow the power law because now you have hurricane wind type situation. You understand how, and you can still study because science can study hurricanes, but now you are not describing gravity, you're describing a different phenomenon. Do you understand how this works? Do you understand the relevance of this example, of this analogy?
I think it's a brilliant analogy. When you were making the analogy of the two rocks, different sizes, and how they're still going to hit the ground at the same time, I'd never heard that before. I never knew that. And I would have intuitively said that the smaller rock probably would have hit the ground after the bigger rock. So I thought that was a great analogy. And I think that makes sense. And that's a great answer to that question. And I'm personally surprised that Bitcoin in Argentinian pesos actually lasted for 14 years following a power law. I wouldn't have...
For 10 years, and then in the last 5 years started to deviate because the inflation went so crazy, it became exponential. It's almost like saying, hey, if I am in this location and there is no an hurricane, is gravity will still work normally, but then it still works normally all the time, right? Underneath, the power law is still there. It's just that during an hurricane, the winds are so big that it seems like there is no gravity, right? Because cows are flying, cars are flying, everything is flying. Because at that point, it's what is dominant is the pesos, not the power law. And so this is how you need to understand it. We want something, you want to use something that is relatively stable and then make this comparison, right, between the behavior of Bitcoin and that relatively stable. I know that USD is inflationary and it's not good and we don't like it, all these things, but it's relatively stable to other currencies, right? And also it's the currency that is used for trading, right? People don't trade Argentinian peso, very little, almost nothing. It's the real world trading of Bitcoin is through USD. So this is why it's important to do it in USD. We can always correct. This is what we do in physics. We first study the general case and the essential case. Gravity is essential, and then we say, okay, what if I have a little bit of air drag? What if I have wind? You can always add all these things, but first, even I taught for 10 years in college. This is what we do it. If you study gravity and you come to my class, I will show you, and there is a reason why a big stone and a small stone fall at the same time. There are these experiments where on the moon they took a feather and a hammer. You can go watch it. You can go online and find this video. And they drop the two things at the same time, a feather, eagle feather, and a hammer. Because there is no air on the moon, the two things arrive on the ground exactly at the same time. It's really almost like our eyes get confused, say, what is going on there? It seems almost like somebody made it up. But it's true. You can do it in the lab. You can take a glass, jar, you take all the air out or almost all the air out, and inside there is like a little feather and a little stone. They fall at the same time. And that means the air, it's like a distraction. It's like something that makes us think incorrectly, like you were thinking correctly, because we confuse what is essential with what is not essential. And you can always add the air and say, okay, what if I add a little bit of air? And then you start to see the feather starts to be a little bit slower, Okay, the air is an addition, it's a complication, and you can study it in that way. But that is the answer to that question. But if you don't mind, I want to jump on the slides, because we have a limited time and I want to be very focused in giving you the entire story of what is going on.
That would be phenomenal.
So I'm going to share the screen. So first of all, and I will spend only 1 second because I don't want to focus on negative things. I want to focus on positive things. But this is what I was telling you about S2F before. So the red data here is just random. I just made it up. It's just random numbers. I basically simulated flow, like creation of Bitcoin, but it's just random numbers. Like with the computer, it can make random numbers. And then I follow step by step. There are two main steps. If you go to Plan B article, I follow each step. I reconstructed his procedure. And in fact, you can see the blue line is the real S2F. It looks familiar, right? It looks exactly like the real S2F, that Plan B published. And then the red one is the one that I create with fake numbers. And you can see the two are basically identical. You cannot distinguish them.
Very
and here
similar.
is even the difference here is because I randomize even the halving date. So the halving date is whatever you like. I can put it anywhere. And if I made it perfectly coincide, actually they will be almost indistinguishable, completely indistinguishable. But I made them random, the halving date, and they look slightly different, but otherwise they are almost one-to-one. And that tells you one thing, that is a fake model. It's literally fake. I can take anything and show there is this relationship because it's a very bad case of correlation doesn't imply causation. I could have used my age, anything that happens every 4 years, the number of viewers of the Olympic Games. And if I jump every 4 years, maybe because they became bigger, the number became bigger every 4 years, you will do the same. I could take that and say, look, that explains the price of Bitcoin, the number of people that every 4 years tune in on the Olympic Games. You will see exactly the same thing. It's crazy, it's stupid, and I don't know why people didn't realize this, but this is what it is. I took me time because I needed to study before I talk about something I want to study. So I spent time studying it, understanding it, and I arrived to this conclusion. And I have a video explaining all the steps. So if people are interested, they can watch that. But let's go to the theory, to the power law theory, and let's discuss that instead.
That'd be amazing. And we will definitely link to the video you made discussing why stock to flow is flawed in the description down below for people to check out.
So anyway, so this is where I would like to start. It's basically showing that I want to study Bitcoin like a science, right? And so I have this nice picture that one of my followers made of some scientists looking at Bitcoin with a telescope. This is kind of in Renaissance clothes, because it's kind of like going back to these times where people were debating the geocentric system versus the heliocentric system, Galileo, Kepler, and so on. It's also relevant because these power laws that we're discussing, the planets are a power law. The motion of the planets around the sun is described by a power law. So this is why I have this slide. But I always start here and say, see, this is what most of the people that don't know about Bitcoin are maybe familiar with Bitcoin. This is what they show on the different financial show like CNBC and Kramer. He doesn't work anymore, but they used to show charts like this. This is a linear chart. What this chart is the number of days. They usually don't have days, we have dates, but here is the number of days since Bitcoin was created and the price. And they are linear, both linear. That means they go, like what everybody's familiar with. A chart like this shows Bitcoin like this regular, very irregular thing, right? So yeah, okay, went up, some crazy price, then it crashed, then it went up even more, then it crashed even harder. It's giving the sensation that we are dealing with something very erratic, nothing that it's worthwhile to be trusted, or you will not put all your saving or everything you have, selling your shares, like a seller says, and buy this thing. Yes, it seems to kind of overall going up, but it could go to zero anytime because it does these huge big fluctuations. Who knows? Maybe it goes to zero. It never recovered. What is what Warren Buffett believes, that it will go to zero and it will never go up. And so this is what most people do. Then there is this chart. And here I already put the regularity they found, that is this power law and the deviation from the power law. But forget for a moment these rainbow colors and look at the general black behavior, with black curve of the Bitcoin. It looks much more regular. And this is what I did here. I'm taking the log of the y-axis. What is the log? The log is this mathematical tool or function, and it's a very simple. Many people think that these things are complicated, but there are ways of simplifying concepts. And one way for me to understand a log is to think it almost like a little box. You put something in the little box, the box spits out something. And what the log does. So it basically, if you describe numbers as powers, because the entire idea here is that we are switching our attention from linear numbers to numbers that represent what is called a scale or a order of magnitude. So, for example, if I want to describe all the animals, right, going from a small little bacteria to an elephant, I don't want to focus on small little changes. I want to focus on how an animal is bigger than the other by a factor of 10, for example, right? So this animal is 10 times bigger than a bacteria, this other animal is 10 times bigger than these other animals, and so on, right? So if I wanted to describe them all in one big chart, let's say, I will focus on these changes, big, huge changes by a factor of 10. This is what is called an order of magnitude, or a scale. That is another word that we use to order of magnitude to describe. So one thing that we do in science is to use these numbers where we represent the numbers with a power. So for example, 10 is 10 to the 1, right? Because it means 10 times 1, so 10, right? Then if I have 100, I can describe it as 10 times 10, or 10 to the 2, right? So 10 to the 2 is 100. 1,000 is 10 times 10 times 10, so 10 to the 3, and so on. 10,000 is 10 to the 4, 100,000, 10 to the 5. This is called the scientific notation. So what the log does, you give me a number using it. It doesn't have to be written as a scientific notation, but it's easier to understand. So you give me 100, I put it in the box, and what the log does, it gives me the power. So if I put 100, it gives me 2. If I put 1,000, it gives me 3. If I put 10,000, it gives me 4. You see how it works? So this is why, for example, in this scale here on the left, you see these numbers. 0 is 1, actually, because 10 to the 1 is, 10 to the 0 is 1. 1 is what the log gives you, so 10, right? So if you have 10, it gives you 1. 2, if you have 100, right? 1,000, 10,000, and so on. It's that simple. If you do it in that way, you show things that you are not able to show here. You see, it looks very different. Here now, for example, the first bumps are almost invisible in this chart. But in this chart, now you can see them, because basically I'm giving the same weight, the same importance to all these little changes. Bitcoin was only $10, right? 10 to the 1 was about $10 or $20 during this time. Here was a fraction, because when you have 10 to the minus 1, that is a fraction. It's 1 over 10 in that case. It was just few cents. So here it was 100,000. So you see, I'm giving the same importance to all these changes in magnitude. And now I reveal a pattern. There is a much nicer organized pattern here. And you don't know what it is, because it looks like it's kind of flattening out. It's not really flattening out. What the flattening out is an illusion. The illusion here is that in a graph like this, if we had an exponential, if something went very fast, like an exponential means anything that doubles at a regular pace, right? So if you have like a virus, if a virus multiplies itself and it doubles every, let's say, day, eventually the growth of the virus will be an exponential. So, or like if you have interest rates, right? So you have an investment and you have a certain, it doubles every certain number of years or whatever, over a long period of time, it will be an exponential. An exponential in a chart like this will look like a straight line, because what the log does, it almost cancels the exponential, basically. The log is the opposite of exponential. They kind of cancel each other. So they cancel each other, and so you will get a straight line in a graph like this. And you can see that Bitcoin is not an exponential, because if it was, it will look like a straight line. It looks slower. This is why this illusion that is flattening is not flattening, because you can see here that it goes up, right, very fast. And in a moment, we will see what really is this behavior, which kind of function shows this behavior, but is slowing down relatively to the exponential. So it's not an exponential. This is the first thing that we find out, that it's not an exponential. And at the same time, that it looks like the path is very regular. You have this very nice curve, and many people notice, but they pay enough attention, because our human eyes is not very good in finding a pattern when you have a curve, right? What is that pattern? Is it a real pattern? Is it not a pattern? Is it in a function? Is it an equation? It's not easy, right? So in physics, when we do, many times we start like this, we do a linear graph, right? If we're studying some phenomena, because let's say I wanted to study these two quantities and how they are related to each other. Is there a pattern? Is there a connection between these two things? Because in physics, we look for one thing that causes another, right? This is how we do physics. When we discover there is one quantity that creates, an influence on another quantity. So many times we do an experiment and we produce charts like this. Is the price and time related with each other? If we don't see a linear chart, we do this chart that is called a log linear chart, because it has log in the y-axis and linear in the x-axis. And here we start to see a regularity, but I don't see yet a clear pattern. So the next trick that in physics we do is to do this, that is a log chart. So we take the log of the x-axis and the log of the y-axis. And when I did this, that is something that I should have done earlier, because I did it. I started to study Bitcoin in 2013 as a science, and I did other power laws. For example, because the beauty of Bitcoin is that we have all these amazing data, right? We can get data about Bitcoin behavior from the blockchain. And so this is called on-chain data. You can get the number of addresses, how many wallets there are, the transactions, the price, the hash rate. You can get, this is the first experiment in human history where we have something that has value like Bitcoin, a lot of value, and also has all these different pieces of information that we can study. Because in the past, people will not give you all this information. It was not available, or if a government or a bank had it, they will not give it to you. And instead, this is open source, right? This is a beautiful thing about Bitcoin, one of the many beautiful things that we can study it and share the information and trying to make sense of Bitcoin with all these different parameters. So what I did in the past was to look at things like price and addresses, for example, and did find there was a power law there. There was a relationship that I will, I already explained what a power law is, but I will repeat it in a moment. There was a very precise relationship between price and addresses. And in fact, it's actually now part of my theory. That piece is included. But I didn't realize that there was actually a real direct relationship between price and time, because that is kind of a holy grail. If you can find a relationship, a simple relationship between price and time, then you can use these to make prediction, because it's all about, if you have time, you can extend time in the future and say what will price will be in the future, because I can, if I find a pattern, I can say, okay, what about 2 years from now? What 5 years from now? 10 years from now? So that was the holy grail. And I got it when I actually decided, I don't know why I did it before, but nobody else did it either. So I was the first one. It's one of these things where when you think about, say, why did I think before, right? But until somebody does it, nobody does it, right? So I think I was the first one. I looked everywhere. Nobody ever mentioned this thing. So I made that Reddit post. I could have published this in a paper, like in a journal, because actually one of the things that people don't know, that actually there are many scientists that started to study Bitcoin as a science. And in particular, there is a physicist that I like a lot. He wrote books about why the market crashed. His name is Sornet. And he already published 3 papers on Bitcoin from a scientific point of view. But he didn't notice this. He didn't notice that Bitcoin itself, the price itself, is a power law of time. I was the first one. And what does it mean? Well, first of all, look at this graph. Look at this graph. So it looks so different, right? So, for example, these guys that have this show called What Bitcoin Did, they show a chart like this, and they were discussing, and they called it the chart that cannot be unseen. So once you see Bitcoin behaves in this very regular fashion, because all of a sudden you don't see that curve anymore. You see a straight line, right? If before it was a curve, now it's a straight line. Yes, it's a weird straight line because it oscillates, right, around some kind of imaginary straight line in between, in the middle, but it's still very regular, right? Very straightforward, you can say. It oscillates, but it continues to go up in a very, very, very regular fashion. And human beings like straight lines. So when I saw this thing, I saw, okay, this as a scientist and having the training that I had, I immediately recognized this cannot be by chance. There is something really weird going on with Bitcoin price. And one other thing you could do, you could average out this bubble. You could take an average, like a moving average over a month, every 10 months, a year, 2 years. And what you will see is that these bubbles become smaller and smaller, and they approach that straight line in the middle. So the straight line in the middle, how do we find it? It's basically this technique called regression, where you have an algorithm that is trying to find the smallest distance of every single point from an imaginary line, and the goal of the algorithm is to find this line. It's the line that makes most data points happy, in a sense. It's the line that minimizes the distance of each single point. It's called the best fitting line. And that best fitting line tells us that the model works. Sorry for that, because
no worries, it's fine.
Because first of all, you can see that number are square, means it's 0.95, and that tells us that about 95% of the behavior of Bitcoin can be explained by this very simple straight line. And so that is a powerful conclusion that even if it looks like it's oscillating, most of the behavior of Bitcoin can be explained by that straight line. But also, what is very powerful is that this type of relationship where you see a straight line in a graph where you have a log of one quantity versus a log of another quantity, they are called power laws. And I don't go into the detail of the mathematics. I have videos about that in my YouTube, etc. But basically, it tells us that there is a very simple relationship between these two quantities. And the relationship, you can see in the title, goes where the price equal is proportional to the time with a power. The power is, whatever number you raise this number to, right? This time. And in this case, for Bitcoin, for this particular calculation is 5.282. That is very close to 6. Now, the beautiful thing about this is that, first of all, it's a simple formula. You can plug in the number of days from when Bitcoin was born, and it tells you this general trend price. And by the way, we did this 5 years ago, and we have graphs where we can show you what happened in these 5 years. And exactly because 5 years was more or less here, right? Look at where we were. And more or less, this line didn't change in the last 5 years. And Bitcoin went through that line, up and down through that line. So we have already 5 years of prediction that were correct. One of the things that people don't realize, I didn't come up with this yesterday. I came up with 5 years ago, and people verify that is the case. Some people, even some of the people that follow me that are financial people, there is this financial professor, he literally said these words. He said, I never saw anything like this in all my career as a financial analyst. And one of the things he did to make that statement, he took half of the data, for example, and he made a prediction to see if I only take half of the data, what is the prediction? And then he took the entire thing and he compared. And they were so close to each other that he actually made the statement. I never saw any financial data. You can see there is a video where he is interviewed by Fred Krueger that he also interviewed. And his name of this guy is Sintz. Sintz say he's that is his ex username, and he say, I never saw anything like this in all my financial data analysis financial career. It's unique to Bitcoin. And it's not about Giovanni, it's about Bitcoin. This is how incredible regular Bitcoin is. Now, the beauty of this is that when you find a power law, so a power law again is a relationship between a quantity versus another quantity with the power. These are not another model. You're going in a completely different land. Power law are amazing. They have all kinds of beautiful consequences, and they are also very universal. It means that Bitcoin is following some kind of universal pattern that is very, very similar. And first of all, this is what the power law is, right? And this is the particular power law for Bitcoin, this equation. I have an app that people can play and can put days and calculate, so you can get familiar with these. But the beautiful thing, this is a slide that really matters the most, is that we found power laws all over the place, all over in nature. There are power laws that relate to the metabolism of an animal with its size, for example. You see, it's a straight line in a log. How do you know it is a power law? Anytime I have a graph where I have a log of one quantity versus the log of another, and I get a straight line, it's a power law. And of course, with the planets, for example, you get that. You get all the planets, take the log of the distance of the planet versus how long it takes the planet to go around the sun. You put all the planets there, all the data points, you get a beautiful straight line. It's very, very precise, almost perfect straight line. By the time you go to the animals, you see much more irregularity because animals are more complex. But it's still amazing that over this incredible range of magnitude, because that is the other important thing about the power law. You want to span a huge, big range. Like here, for example, we go from a very small little mouse that is a fraction of a kilo to a huge, big elephant, right? And so that is many orders of magnitude. In fact, almost 5 orders of magnitude. In the metabolic rate, 4 orders of magnitude, because they go from a fraction of a watt. Look at, for example, human beings are 100 watts. So it means humans consume the same energy of a bulb. That is kind of crazy, very interesting graph. I love this graph. I brought an entire huge big, I will write an article about this so people can actually write, but they can research it. It's called the Kleber's law. That is different videos about it. It's really cool. It basically tells us there is a universal path that makes animal have a relationship between their size and how much energy they use. And it turns out, because that the other important fundamental thing when you study these power laws is the slope. The slope tells us the power. It turns out, that's from simple mathematics. So remember, I say for Bitcoin is 5.83. For this Kleber's law that talks about the metabolism is 3/4. And the beauty of that, because there are consequences. Once you study, you focus on that number, what that number means. You focus on that number, and that number tells you a story. And the story here, and there are beautiful videos where they describe this better than I can do. But basically, it's a conservation principle, some kind of economy of scale. It turns out that when you double the size of an animal, you will expect 2 times the energy, right? Or if you go from the mouse all the way to the elephant, it is almost 10,000 times bigger animal relatively to the mouse, you will expect 10,000 times more energy. Well, if an elephant consumes that level of energy, it will eat everything around it. There will be nothing for anybody else. It turns out, because of the power of 3/4, you have a saving by the time you go to the elephant by almost 10. And 10 times. So instead of using 10 times more energy, it needs only 1,000 times more energy. It's a beautiful thing, because that allows for big animal like elephant. We want elephant, right? We love elephant, big ears and big trunk. It's a beautiful animal, and it will not exist if it was not because of this power law. And so there is some truth and some organization and some wisdom in nature to get everything in terms of power law. And so it turns out they show up in languages. So for example, how languages are organized, our power laws, our cities. So people say often, oh, what about human phenomena? They don't follow laws, or we cannot be described by mathematics. It's not true. There is an entire field of physics that study the application of these processes in social events, like how city builds. For example, the GDP of a city is a power law relatively to the size. The number of gas stations in a city is a power law. The number of libraries is a power law. So human behavior, a lot of different the number of terrorist attacks are power law. It's crazy. There are power laws everywhere. They work. They are very universal. This is what we will say in physics. And they tell something about the nature of the phenomena. So because we don't have a lot of time, I want to go to the next slide. So first of all, there is a beautiful book that I suggest everybody to read. It should be like the new Bitcoin standard. Okay, this is the update Bitcoin standard. Read this book, right? Because it talks about this scale behavior in nature all around us. And Bitcoin is such type of phenomena. So this is why we need to study. But I was telling you, I developed this theory where I found power laws everywhere. There are power laws in hash rate. There are power laws in addresses. So now we know how to describe adoption, because addresses are a proxy for adoption. And it turns out the addresses grow up with the cube of time. And now if you combine this growth of a cube of time of addresses and the number of how addresses affect price, is something that is called the Metcalfe law. But is also something that we can observe experimentally. So we have a power of 2, that is how addresses affect the price. So you double the number of Bitcoiners, you get 4 times the price. You triple the number of Bitcoiners, you get 9 times the price. And because the growth of Bitcoin goes with the power law of 3 in time, when you combine these 2 things, you get 6. This is where that 6 comes from in the price. This is why. And this is why this theory is so much better than anything else that we have over there, because it explains why Bitcoin behaves in the way it does.
So sadly, we're going to have to end our conversation with Giovanni there. We ran out of time on the day of recording, and I still have a number of questions and concerns about the Bitcoin power law. So guys, let us know in the comments down below if you would like me to interview Giovanni again, or anyone else to talk about the Bitcoin power law. And with all that said, hope you enjoyed it. We talked about similar topics in recent interviews with Larry Lepard and of course Preston Pish. You can find both of those videos linked up on screen somewhere around there. With all that said, hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day.